Good afternoon, everyone. This has been such a warm welcome to Boston that I always think I'm not nervous, and then I get wonderful openings like that, and it makes me nervous. But the nerves is really the emotion, the excitement to be with you here today in this magnificent room. And I'd like to thank you for supporting UNICEF and coming to listen about a topic that is so very dear to my heart. In Tanzania, there is a boy named Michael. He's the eldest son of 6 children, and along with one of his sisters and one of his brothers, Michael is albino. Albinism is a rare genetically inherited condition that's found in all ethnicities around the world. And people with albinisms have little or no pigmentation in their eyes, or their hair, or their skin, because they have a lack of melanin. They're sensitive to bright light, and they have a higher average of skin cancer from sun exposure. And many people with albinism also are visually impaired. Michael's life is difficult because of these impairments that are caused by his condition. He has to protect himself from the hot sun with wearing long sleeve clothing, and he has to wear sunglasses to protect his eyes. And he also has trouble at school because sometimes he cannot see the blackboard, and he always has to sit in the shade. Tanzania as a country does not have the sufficient vision-enhancing technology, and without it, children with albinism have a hard time graduating from school, or even worse, finding employment. Michael's family is poor, so they cannot afford the school fees sometimes, but they do. They scrape together to get him to go to school. But he has very few friends because of the horrible discrimination against people with albinism. Some people believe that albinos are not human and that they never die, and that their condition is a curse from the gods, and that if you touch them yourself, you will be cursed. Practitioners of witchcraft in Tanzania hunt and kill albinos for their body parts. They use them in their organs and charms and in potions. And for centuries, some people have believed that if they go to a witch doctor with albino body parts, that they will become rich and prosperous. Even though it is illegal to kill people with albinism in Tanzania, it still happens. So one day, Michael's father's friend came to the house and warned him that his 3 albino children were in danger, that there were people coming to hunt them down. And he begged them to flee. But can you imagine, this is a poor family with few resources that can hardly afford to send their children to school, and they're being asked to flee. But because his parents loved him and his brothers and sisters so much, they packed everything up, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, they fled to another city, traveling 500 kilometers. 2 days later, they received news that people had broken into their house to kill them. Upon realizing that the family had escaped, the perpetrators went to the next door neighbor, who was the community's albino representative, who had been an advocate in helping them and others like them in their community. And the intruders cut off his genitals and his arms, and they left him to die. Today around the world, there are 93 million children under the age of 15 with disabilities. And 80% of these 93 million children live in the developing world. Too often, these children are referred to as a problem. But they are nothing of the sort. You just have to see the child. Given the opportunity, children with disabilities have the potential to make valuable contributions to their families, to their communities, and to society as a whole. Yet surviving and thriving for these children can be especially difficult, as they are at greater risk of being poor, or if they are a minority group, they confront additional challenges as a result of their impairments and the never-ending barriers with which they are faced. In many countries, the response to the situation of children with disabilities is limited to institutionalization, abandonment, or neglect. And this is a problem that is rooted in negative or paternalistic assumptions of incapacity and dependency perpetrated by ignorance. But without change, without seeing the child first, children with disabilities will continue to have their rights neglected, to experience discrimination, violence, and abuse, and to have their opportunities restricted and to be excluded from society. This exclusion is often a consequence of being invisible. Few countries have reliable information on how many of their citizens are children with disabilities and what are the specifics of their impairments and life conditions. And because of the stigma and the discrimination and cultural taboos, even adoring parents and family members can be reluctant to report that their child has a disability, whether it's because they themselves are trying to avoid being shunned or because they are overprotective of their child, or sometimes both. If the child is born with an impairment, sometimes their birth might not even be registered, which completely excludes the child from fulfilling its rights to education, healthcare, and any type of social service. In Madagascar, it is found through one study that ignorance about disability was common among parents themselves, 40% mistakenly believing that disability is contagious. A study in 2009 done in Vietnam reported that although there was general tolerance for children with disabilities, their presence in public holidays such as Tet, which marks the new lunar year, was considered detrimental to good fortune. We have to see the child. So depending on what type of disability a child has, where they live, and the cultures or class that they belong to, they will face different types of exclusion. Those who live in rural and indigenous communities, they contend with multiple disadvantages. They have disabilities, they belong to marginalized groups, they live in remote locations with little or no access to any type of social service. And girls are less likely than boys to receive care and to receive food. An insufficient food or poorly balanced diet that doesn't have certain vitamins or minerals such as iodine, vitamin A, iron, zinc. These can leave infants and children vulnerable to conditions or infections that can lead to disabilities. While undernutrition can be a cause of disability, it can also be a consequence. Indeed, children with disabilities are at a heightened risk of undernutrition. An infant with a cleft palate may not be able to breastfeed or to consume food efficiently. Children with cerebral palsy, they may have difficulty chewing or swallowing. In certain conditions such as cystic fibrosis, they may impede nutrient absorption. And malnutrition in mothers can also lead to a number of childhood disabilities. Approximately 42% of pregnant women in low and middle income countries are anemic. And anemia also affects more than half of preschool-age children in developing countries. It's one of the most prevalent causes of disability in the world, and therefore a serious global public health issue. Iodine deficiency. Iodine you find everywhere here in the United States in your salt. Iodine deficiency is one of the most common cause of preventable mental impairment worldwide. So what does that mean? Simply put, consuming non-iodized salt or not enough iodine in your salt or in your diet causes brain damage. So some 165 million children under the tender age of 5 are stunted or chronically undernourished, and more than 100 million children around the world are considered underweight. This is not acceptable. We have to see the child. Girls and young women with disabilities also have the double disability, or doubly disabled, because they're confronting the prejudice and the inequalities on top of the traditional gender roles and barriers. They are less likely to go to school, and they're at greater risk of being abused. So let's imagine a poor family and a girl born into that poor family who's of a minority group. They live in a rural, remote area, and she was born with a severe intellectual disability that her community believes is a curse that was brought onto the family because of some wrong past doing. And so her parents do not register her birth. By the time she can move around, she is tied up to a pole so that she does not wander off while her mother has to do chores, and she is there or not to hurt herself. She is the last to be fed, and she never will receive medical care. And so she will never even receive the vaccinations in the mobile clinics that are coming through the community because the child is not seen. She is never played with. And when she wails, which could be because she's in pain or she's scared, or she just cannot control her wailing, she is beaten until the noise stops. And in so many cases, girls just like her are sexually abused. And in the worst cases, they are raped, causing severe internal bleeding, and they are left to die. We must not just know of these situations. We must see the child. And this child's name was Alicia. In emergencies, people with disabilities have even more of a challenge. Those who survived the storm, like that just recently in the Philippines, or escaped the civil conflict in Syria, what do they do if they've lost a cane, or their wheelchair, or some sort of aid that protects their eyes from the sun? Or what if they've lost their family member or caregiver who was their sign language translator? According to the World Health Organization, in many low-income countries, only 5 to 15% of people who need assistive technology are able to attain it. And with children, it's often less than adults that have access to it. If I didn't have this walker here with me today, which is affectionately known as my Ferrari, and called Red Butler, I would not be with you here today. We must see the child. The issue of disability is not new to UNICEF. We've been working in this area since the 80s. But what is different is that the agency has moved from just focusing on the protection of children with disabilities to promoting their rights as the same as all other children. And according to the World Health Organization, disability is not purely biological, nor is it social. Rather, it's the interaction between this health condition, one's environment, and our personal factors. And disability occurs at 3 different stages. So for example, a person may experience an impairment in body function or structure, such as blindness. The second stage is where the impairment causes some sort of limitation in activity. So with a person who's blind, it may be the inability to read print materials or to move around without some sort of orientation. And the third stage is when that limitation turns into a restriction in participation. So for example, a child who is blind who cannot read print materials, if the school does not have Braille, they are excluded from the school. It's just like me. When I want to walk around, when I want to go and vote, if the ballot box is 3 stairs up and there's no handrail, the disability is not because I cannot walk up the stairs without assistance. It is because of that barrier that is preventing me from voting. This is what we consider the disability. This is the definition that UNICEF is also using in its work. So there are 3 different models and approaches of which disability has been looked at. I'm going to go over them very quickly because I can talk about this for days. But the first model and the approach is the charity model, which unfortunately is so commonly used still today. It looks at the person with the disability as inferior, useless, dependent, a burden to society, a result of divine punishment. They're not expected to contribute in any way, and still too often this approach is used in prevention campaigns or funding appeals that elicit feelings of dependency and pity. I'm going to give you an example. I just spent 2 years in Haiti, one of the greatest blessings of my life, driving to work, yes I drive, a UNICEF vehicle, and on the radio is a commercial for a vaccination campaign to prevent polio. And it's in Creole, and I speak French well enough to understand the Creole, and they said, if you do, come and get your children vaccinated. If you don't, they will become a cripple. The word in Creole for cripple is kokobe. Kokobe has a negative connotation equivalent to the word cripple in English. They also use the word handicapé, which is the equivalent to French handicap, but in this particular case, the word kokobe was used. And the power of working for UNICEF, got on the phone, called Dr. Ayoya, who was our chief of health and nutrition at the time, who was able to call the Ministry of Health and report that this was on the radio. And we worked with the Ministry of Communication, and the commercial was pulled. We don't want to make parents afraid that you will have a disability, that this is a bad thing. Of course, we don't want any child to have polio, and that's why we're so dedicated to preventing polio. But this is not the right language to use. The second model is the medical model. where they just look at a disability as a medical condition of an individual, something that should be fixed. You need to focus on fixing that person so that they can be accepted and integrated into society. This sets very low expectations of their integration and labels them as abnormal. The third model and approach, and this is the one that UNICEF uses, is the social and human rights approach. This sees disability as human diversity. It was actually in my Facebook post yesterday. It said, today is International Day of Persons with Disabilities, and I'm so proud to be a part of human diversity. And I got like 87 likes. I was so proud of the people who were enjoying that. But it's true, and I feel this from UNICEF and being a part of UNICEF. But as mentioned, the social and human rights approach looks at disability as human diversity. And it's shifting the focus from looking at the impairment to the relationship with society. It promotes equal rights and this opportunity and inclusion. So if a person in a wheelchair, as I was mentioning, or me with my walker, is unable to reach that ballot box, we need to break down the barriers, whether they're physical barriers or stigma and discrimination. Why are you here? What are you doing here? So that these people can fulfill their rights. And combined with this inclusive approach and the fundamentals of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, we look at changing society and addressing the issues and the specific needs. Something that's very important that we don't sometimes even think about are the words and the images that we use. We want to, when we say child with polio, a child with a disability, you don't hear me saying disabled children. You don't hear me saying polio-affected child. We want to see the child first. So we don't want to use language like a child confined to a wheelchair. The child is not confined. The child can be taken out of the wheelchair. The child uses their wheelchair. I am not confined to my walker. I use it. You should see how fast I can go on this thing. It's the same what we want to do. When we're talking about someone who has an impairment, who has a disability or lives with a disability, we don't want to say the little blind girl or the little deaf boy. We want to use their names. Or if we don't know their names, then we can say the girl with a hearing impairment, or the boy with a visual impairment, or the boy who is blind. This is very, very important to put the child first, because then we are able to recognize their rights and work forward from there. And one word that we hope we never use when distinguishing children with or without disabilities is normal. So a child who has a disability is not a child who is abnormal. They are a child who is different. UNICEF has 3 goals with its work. And that is, 1, mainstreaming children with disabilities in everything that we do. In our vaccination campaigns, in our work in health with mothers. We also look at in the areas of child protection, especially when children are institutionalized and abandoned because of their disabilities. We look at advocating to change laws, as Barbara mentioned. We want to be a champion for the rights of persons with disabilities by having people with disabilities, whether they're international or national staff or identifying community members, to speak out on behalf of those in their community and the challenges that they face. And we want to promote inclusion, having children with disabilities receiving services with children who do not have disabilities, and creating that community together. I'm going to tell you a little story. Last night, I had the honor of attending the Snowflake Ball in New York City. And my father's side is Indian, so I always tried to celebrate my Indian heritage. And I wore 6 yards of cloth, jewel-studded sari. Is the dress, is the name of the outfit. It probably took me, between having to iron 6 yards and do my hair and do my makeup and trying to hold my balance, not wearing my leg braces, to get all dolled up. But I felt like a princess. I felt beautiful. And I got to the event and got out of the car, and they explained to me where the accessible entrance was. And so I saw the handicap sign, the disability sign on the wall, and I walked up, and people, of course, are staring. What's wrong with her? And I said, what's wrong with you? And I motioned to the guard to please open the door. And he's motioned for me to go the other way. And I said, no, no, no. And I pointed to the walker. And he was quite stern. And I said, okay, maybe I'm confused. So I went over to, of course, there are like 7 huge stairs and 2 big bodyguards, and they're standing like this. And I said, hi, the gentleman on the other side, I need help because there's a wheelchair lift, won't let me in. So of course, everyone now is nervous because you don't know what to do with the person with a disability. And so they called an event planner, and there was a commotion, and I was like, really? I just want to, be pretty in my dress and feel like the princess of the ball, because yesterday, was my day, it was to celebrate. And it was a huge commotion. And I ended up having to take control of the situation. And I said, gentlemen, would you be so kind to give me an arm? And in my beautiful sari, and I don't walk very elegantly. I mean, sometimes I call it my sexy strut, sometimes it's my wobble. It depends on my mood. But it was hard. I'm my big, beautiful dress, I'm holding on to these men, and I'm struggling to get up the stairs, and one is holding my walker, and actually my sari had just got caught in my wheel, and I had to ask this strange lady, can you help me, because I can't bend over. And I got to the top of the stairs, and the door's this narrow, and the walker got stuck. And I was like, are you kidding me? And then they put me in the revolving door, and the walker and me got stuck in the revolving door. I was like, are you kidding me? And I just got inside, and I was like, I'm tired. Really? And then, you know what? You gotta let it melt away. Can't be angry at the guy who didn't let me in, he didn't know. And all I have to do is look around at this beautiful room that has as much sparkle as I had on my dress, and be grateful for the opportunity to be there and to represent people with disabilities on the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. And it was a blessing. It was a wonderful evening, for which I am very grateful. So it's not to say, when we talk about not using words like not normal, that it's not hard. There are days when it's hard, and I say, I'm just tired. I'd like a break. It's not to say that there aren't wonderful things that have come out of this. And the reason that I can say this is that I used to be the we rather than the they. I was diagnosed at the age of 30 with a severe muscle wasting disease, a very rare type of muscular dystrophy. I grew up running, dancing, skiing, skating. I am an amazing salsa dancer. I taught salsa Latin dancing for 6 years. And I started to have falls, and we didn't know what was happening. And so I had the opportunity, because I am blessed to have been born into a family, to a country that I did have access to healthcare, to go and find out what was wrong. And after 5 years of being misdiagnosed, I was diagnosed with this disease that affects my entire body. My muscles are wasting away, and I've lost, to date, in the past 6 years, 50% of my back, my inner thighs, my hamstrings, my calves, and my ankles. One of the patients described our feet as dead stumps at the end of our legs. And you think, wow, how do you go on? And my parents, the way that they suffer and they hurt because my dad says this is my fault. I was like, it's not your fault. It's not anyone's fault. And every day you think, why would you want to get out of bed? Every opportunity that UNICEF has given me, the blessings to travel around the world and to see the situation of children who we strive to help, I have nothing to complain about. I have a wonderful, loving family. I have my education. I have access to healthcare. And I work for an organization that not only promotes the rights of children with disabilities, but promotes the rights of their staff members and encourages the employment of people with disabilities. When I was asked to go to Haiti in 2012, there were people within the agency who said, she cannot go. It's too dangerous. What if she gets hurt? I said, what if you get hurt? There are more than 1 million people in Haiti who live with disabilities. And if they can do it, where 85% of the population are poor, why can't I? And thanks to the inspiration of our executive director, Tony Lake, we actually have an employment policy that was issued in 2011, and I held on to this for dear life when the questions were being asked. And I said, if I'm a threat to my team, I'm a threat to the operation, I understand. If it's a question of my safety and security, I'm fine. I'll figure it out, slowly but surely. And our representative at the time, Françoise Goulous, she said, absolutely, Cara must come. And accommodations were made. They picked Ricardo, who was a very sweet driver who would help pick up my legs when I'm dangling. They're dangling. I'm trying to get into these huge field vehicles. And Dominique, who was just so kind and patient. If it was we worked on a military base for the first 8 months that I was there in containers and going to outside portable toilets. And if it was windy or hurricane season, which comes every year in Haiti, she'd hold my hand to help me get up to the toilets. Or going to a meeting, I mean, I had 2 canes before, I couldn't carry anything. And so here I am representing a United States agency, and I need somebody to carry my papers for me to my meeting. But my colleagues did that for me, and the agency protected me, and they encouraged me. So it is a great honor for me to work for an organization that not only throughout their work mainstreams children with disabilities, but also then encourages their staff with disabilities to be spokespersons, to get engaged, and allows us to do our work with dignity. UNICEF this is an organizational thrust, let's say, and this year our flagship publication, State of the World's Children, is dedicated to children with disabilities. And this, I hope you will read it, not just the executive summary, but I hope you will take the chance to read the entire publication. There are incredible testimonies, similar to the story that I told you of Michael, in that, of brave people who are trying to make a difference in their community, and the children who we strive to help. There's also the data that is available, that is very difficult to collect, that is in this publication. And then you will also learn about the way that UNICEF works throughout its programs with governments, with community members, with parents, with children. Because remember, who takes care of the child at home are the mothers, predominantly the mothers. How we work together with these groups and our partners on the ground, like St. Boniface here from Haiti, thank you, and our other NGO partners to make a difference for children. I actually knew that I was going to be coming and speaking to you. How many months have we been talking about this? A long time. I officially ended my mission in Haiti on October 12th of this year, so 6 weeks ago. I spent 13 years in the field, and I knew that I was coming to speak to you, so I wrote all of you a letter on the plane. And I didn't look at it until this morning because I didn't want to change anything. So there might be some grammatical mistakes, but I wrote this for you. So this is on October 12th, 2013, about 6 weeks ago. It's Delta Flight 684 from Port-au-Prince to Atlanta, Georgia. Why? Was it because that after 13 years in the field, I had had enough of living without the luxurious comforts of water and electricity, public safety, or decent health care? No. Was it because after 10 different countries and cultures, I could not stand to be farther away from my family? Not really. My parents live in Shanghai, China. Was it because that after 6 years of being diagnosed with this progressive muscle wasting disease that gets worse every day, that I just couldn't handle the rough conditions anymore? Maybe a little bit. But the truth is, the real reason why I moved to the United States after 13 years in the field, in an exhilarating international career and jet-setting lifestyle that so many only dream of, is to find you and to tell you my story. And the story of all of those children who need your help. And who are you? You are the people. You are the friends who care. You are the ones who listen. And you are the ones who support our work. You are the women and the men who understand your daily challenges, and you listen to the challenges of those living in a world that is so different from your own. You are the leaders who, like so many mothers in Madagascar, in China, in Mozambique, in Syria, and in the Philippines, who rise like the phoenix against all odds to make a difference in your communities, in your business, and in your homes. You are the supporters of UNICEF, and as I said, you represent all of those mothers and fathers who are trying to do the best to care for their children and give them a better chance. On that flight from Port-au-Prince to Atlanta, I kept sighing. I cried most of the flight, actually, as well. And the woman beside me kept looking at me thinking, gosh, she's okay. Not sure what was wrong. But it was a heavy heart that I was carrying. because of the children who I was leaving behind in Haiti. Olivier, William, Olsen, Shushu. These are the children who grace the cover of my Facebook page, the wallpaper on my iPhone, and even the picture frames in my office and in my home. And then it is their mothers. These are the phoenixes who rise from the ashes every day to bear the daily chores of poverty, discrimination, deprivation, physical and sexual violence against them and their children with disabilities. So I would ask for you today, when you are learning about UNICEF, when you are wanting to reach out, even here in your own communities, that when we are talking about people with disabilities, especially when we are talking about children with disabilities, please see the child first. I can assure you it will be the greatest blessing of your life. Because when you see the child, you see their heart. And it's that child that will give you more love than you will have ever imagined. I'd like to thank you for listening and supporting children with disabilities, and I'd like to thank you for your support to UNICEF. Questions? I have like 10 different topics I can talk about. I don't know what to say, and then I always do ad-lib. Would anyone have a... Yes, please.
Are things getting better in Haiti?
Yes. One of the greatest challenges of Haiti is the situation of the country before the earthquake. Being the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, extremely high employment rates and poverty rates, corruption. It is a drug route. For 20% of the U.S. supply of drugs goes through Haiti from Colombia and Jamaica. There's a lot of gang violence. It is a country of a people of incredible perseverance and support of the international community. And I think there has been a lot of injustice in the international press about the money that was given to Haiti. $9 billion was pledged, but $9 billion was not received. Just over half of that money was received. But with that money, you do see that children's lives were saved. One example, and this is how UNICEF does its programming, is based on data, is that with the support that was given to the country, vaccination in one particular commune, coverage went from 6% up to over 80%. And when you vaccinate children, you save their lives. When we look at school enrollment, they've just done a national household survey. 83% of Haitian children are enrolled in school. Now, if you think of the number of schools, the thousands of schools that were destroyed in the earthquake, in order for that many children to enroll in school, it means the schools have been rebuilt. It means systems are back in place. And I think people's expectations for what Haiti should look like and where it should be now are sometimes unfair. One, because of the situation the country was in before the earthquake, but also because we have to take into consideration that 2/3 of civil society members were killed in the earthquake. Every single ministry building, including the presidential palace, crumbled to the ground. Same with the United Nations building. So imagine 1.6 million people displaced all over the city, predominantly Port-au-Prince. So when we think of this massive emergency response, just to keep people alive with the resources that it takes on a daily basis, food, shelter, water, clothing, and on top of that, it's not like the hurricanes stopped, or the natural disasters that hit Haiti every year stopped because they were an emergency response. You do see the rubbles being cleared. You see construction everywhere. You see health centers being built. And you see people on the ground who have sane and sustainable practices, sustainable programs in place. I mean, just looking at the situation of people with disabilities. I was telling the story this morning. Laws are being passed, meaning the government is also back in place. And one law that's very important is the Integration of Persons for the Protection of People with Disabilities. And a woman in the airport who had prosthetic legs, who had lost her legs in the earthquake, she was strip searched by 3 men in a private room, completely stripped naked. And they took off her prosthetic legs Because of the awareness raising of the Secretary of State, Secretary Oriol for the Integration of People with Disabilities, organizations such as UNICEF, Saint Boniface, other NGOs that are working with these communities, this woman was aware of her rights, and she has been able to file in court with the support of the Secretary of State a claim against what was done to her. We see it also in survival rates. The number of women and children that are dying every year is less. And it's not to say that the situation is still not dire. It absolutely is. Every year in Haiti, 7,000 children die within the first month of life. We could save these babies' lives if their mother gave health in maternity wards with skilled midwives, with access to medication, and in the case of an emergency, access then to the hospital and doctors. And this is something that Saint Boniface is working on, and also that UNICEF is building maternity clinics with trained health workers around the country. And we see every month the number rising of women who are going, and not only if they're the prenatal, and when they're having their prenatal checks, they're learning how to care for their babies, how to feed them properly, that they get their vaccinations, that they send their children to school, but also how to save their own lives. We have thousands of mothers who die in Haiti every year giving birth to their children. And for every mother who dies, 2 to 3 who have complications survive and are left with a disability. So we see these health structures, we see progress in not only social services, but in business in Haiti. And the attention of the international community, although it has significantly shifted down, hundreds of NGOs have left the country, we still do see progress. Because organizations like Haiti, or UNICEF, who have been there for over 30 years, we're not going anywhere. Yes?
6 weeks ago you returned, and what's your next chapter? You're a fabulous speaker.
Oh, thank you.
An incredible.
UNICEF, again, has given me the blessed opportunity. I'm hired out of Child Protection Headquarters, New York. They have seconded me to the U.S. Fund, and I am allowed to stay in Atlanta so I can do my physiotherapy. First time in my life I'm ever having physiotherapy. Is to do what I'm doing today, is to travel the country, to speak at events, and to tell the story of the wonderful children and mothers that I've met, and tell the stories of my colleagues who are there day in and day out. So this is what I'll be doing.
Well, you're wonderfully suited to
Thank
it.
you. Next question.
Hi, Cara. Can you speak for a minute about your relationship with Connor's organization, St. Boniface? And are you doing any policy work with partners in health in Haiti?
With St. Boniface, we have a nutrition program. This is predominant, and he's probably more well-versed in that particular partnership. But UNICEF does support their nutrition program, and actually we were just discussing now how we can also support their maternity ward. It's emergency obstetric care, correct? What UNICEF does on the ground is a United Nations agency, and this will help explain our relationship with them and also with Partners in Health, is as a United Nations agency, we work directly with the ministries, in this case health, or education, or the child protection agencies, and with our NGO, international and local NGO partners on the ground. So we very much are there to help design programs that will be sustainable, that will be permanent parts of the system. And it is organizations such as St. Boniface that are actually implementing the program. And UNICEF is there side by side, either in the design of the program, sometimes it comes to us, sometimes we design the program and then we choose them to implement it. And then we're there side by side for the monitoring and evaluation and the reporting. And so UNICEF takes its convening role, its ability to have, we have very strong metrics, it's our, I would say, clout with the government, and the respect that we have from the community as well to work with organizations such as St. Boniface. In regards to Partners in Health, I don't have in front of me the details of the partnerships, which I can get them for you. I can make a phone call after the talk. But it's very much about sharing information. What is being done? What type of medical services are being provided in Mirror Place in the hospital that was opened? We sit at the same table. So Paul Farmer sits with our representative, Edouard Weber, when they're sitting with the Minister of Health to talking about what are the needs in the different areas. UNICEF targets the most vulnerable children in Haiti. So it's what we call our equity approach. You're looking at the poorest percentile, and then within that poorest percentile, you're looking at the most vulnerable. So we might not necessarily directly collaborate on a project because of location, because we might not be in Mirablaze, or Partners in Health might not be in another province that we're working in, but that dialogue and that information sharing and skill set sharing is so important. So that is where we are always in partnership with other organizations.
And that includes special needs, not just children's services in and of themselves?
Absolutely, yes, yes. Yes.
When you talk about partnership and those three models, the charity and the medical, how do you approach whether it's an NGO or an individual who might approach it from a charity or a medical approach for disability and move them to the social rights without making them feel like they're doing something wrong or that you think that what they've known is incorrect?
That's a great question. And shall I repeat the question? Yeah. Based on the three models that I was very brief about, the charity model, the medical model, and then the social and human rights model, how do we work in partnerships with organizations that might use another model for their work without insulting them or making them think that they're doing something wrong? Honestly, one, I think it's education and advocacy, and two, it's setting the example. And so if we find an organization that, say, is using certain language that is not acceptable to use with UNICEF, it's open dialogue. And I think one of the things, especially in this area of disability, I mean, I've only been an advocate a few years because I've only had a disability for a few years. But what I have learned, because I didn't know the lingo myself, is an incredible eagerness to learn and to do things better. And I think that it's different sometimes. People aren't necessarily like, well, we're doing this the right way. There's such a hunger, especially in Haiti, I've just come from there, so I'll use examples from there a lot, a hunger for resources and access, whether it be to medical supplies or information or communications tools. So really it's just about having an open, frank conversation. And then I think it's sort of a melting pot. Did I answer your question? Yes, at the back.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I was wondering, you've done so much travel around the world. Is there a country or a region that, in your opinion, is doing a really good job in addressing and including children with disabilities in the mainstream of life?
That's a great question, and it was asked in the conference call we had. There are countries, Ecuador, Vietnam, Cambodia, Bosnia, Madagascar, Mozambique, who have, I say, excellent examples of interventions, whether they specifically target children with disabilities or they are looking at including children with disabilities in mainstream programs. Not only UNICEF's work, but other organizations that we support. The one country that I am very proud of and like to give credit to, not only because I lived there for 3 years, is Ecuador. Ecuador's Vice President Moreno, he himself does have a disability. He is in a wheelchair, and he rose from simple means to being a businessman to coming to be the Vice President of the country. And that country, the oil-producing country, has invested $100 million of oil revenues into its disability agenda. And they have gone door to door, house to house, hut to hut, to find out where are the children with disabilities, what disability do they have, what might be the needs or vulnerabilities of the family, financial aid, for example, assistive devices, looking at schools as well, and investing. They go and they rehabilitate the house. They go and they rehabilitate the school. And that doesn't mean just ramps. That doesn't mean just giving a wheelchair. That doesn't mean just providing sign language translation or Braille books in a school. It means speaking out to change the ideas and perceptions of people, helping them understand that children with disabilities have the same rights as all others, and that these are members of their society who can contribute. So that country has put the resources in place. I mean, I can talk to you all day long, and we can go to every country in the world and talk about the issues facing children with disabilities. At the end of the day, the resources need to be there. Even UNICEF, as an agency, we are 100% supported by our donors. And without that financial support, we cannot do our work. Question?
My question, I have a question for you. Thank you for your comments, and I really appreciate what you said about how important it was to see the child. but I wanted to know if you can share any examples about hearing the child with a disability and what their opinion would be of how you could help them.
That's a wonderful question. And I'm so glad you brought it up because it's one of those things I didn't include. Part of UNICEF's work is doing exactly that, child participation. And as I mentioned, not only as a staff member with a disability, they say don't do anything for us without us. We do that in our work as well. We sit and have child-focused groups. So when we're doing, whether it's looking at a child-friendly space, it's asking children, what are your challenges? What do you feel? What is difficult for you? What do you like best? What do you want to do? And that helps us design our programs. We also facilitate the opportunity for children and youth to participate in national forums, community projects, international forums even. UNICEF has now started to host their global forum on partnerships for children with disabilities, and we bring children to come and speak on behalf of them and their communities about what's important to them and being advocates for change. Here in the United States, we have a very dynamic, brave woman who's one of my heroes, Lucy Mayer. She lives in California. Lucy's 13 years old. She has cerebral palsy, and she has just been named UNICEF, the U.S. Fund for UNICEF's first spokesperson for kids with disabilities. Lucy just met President Obama. She is talking about the issues facing children with disabilities in UNICEF's work to the most powerful man in the country. So, and UNICEF has helped facilitating these opportunities for children like Lucy to speak out and to represent their communities.
Thank you.
Yes.
Many of your comments have been about visible disabilities. What about invisible disabilities, learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder, the many other ones that fall in that category?
That's a great question. So just to repeat in case anyone didn't hear, what about invisible disabilities, the ones we don't always see? And actually in our work, we also, and in some countries and in some disciplines, we look at HIV/AIDS, being HIV positive or having AIDS as also being within the realm of disability because of the stigma and discrimination or the lack of access to healthcare that people might experience. And you don't necessarily always know looking at someone. What UNICEF does is we don't necessarily target in our work. Of course, we have targeted support to, say, an organization that does solely work with children with disabilities. But our programming is not based just for children who might have visual impairments or invisible, let's say, impairments. In general, it's much about advocating for all children with disabilities, to bring it to the mainstreams. We will partner with organizations who have areas of expertise, let's say. When it comes to the invisible disabilities, it's giving that exact message, that not all disabilities are visible. It's about having representation of these children in everything that we do. So for example, we might have a publication about hand washing or about disability, and people look at the picture and they say, well, they don't have a disability. Well, why? Do I have to have a wheelchair? You know, it's like people saying to me, what's wrong with you? I'm like, nothing, what's wrong with you? You know, we try to have representation to say that exact message, that you will not always recognize a disability. It doesn't mean that the stigma and discrimination or the challenges are not there.
I think we have to stop.